All right, welcome to the Latest.com show. I'm Igor Darish, joining us all the way from Canada. He's a staff writer at Latest.com and issue hawk from Toronto, Eric Carrier, and he's a military vet and Latest.com senior political analyst from Pittsburgh, Josh Patton. And he's a 24-year veteran of the U.S. State Department and the author of We Meant Well, How I Helped Lose the Battle for the Hearts and Minds of the Iraqi People. From New York, it's Peter Van Buren. Just within the last couple hours before we recorded this, we saw another mass shooting, this time in California. We don't know a lot. We know that it was multiple attackers supposedly dressed in military gear. We know there's about 20 people shot. At least 3 are dead, though they're saying, some reports are saying there's as many as 12 are dead. Some reports say there was as many as 3 gunmen. The police did say the attacker is not attacker. No one has been taken into custody as far as we know. The shooting happened in the Inland Regional Center, which just says people who are developmentally challenged, but officials say that they were renting out the conference center where the shooting reportedly occurred to the local Department of Health. This is just a few days after the guy went into Planned Parenthood in Colorado, shot 9 people, killed 3 people. We saw a Black Lives Matter protest where 5 people were shot by 3 or 4 men just a week ago. Peter, this has become part of pretty much everyday life in America. Why are we even discussing any other issues when every few days we see people getting slaughtered by other Americans?
You know, I am rarely at a loss for words, but I am very close to being at a loss for words. I mean, the pace of these things seemingly is increasing. We're going from regular mass shootings to multiple mass shootings within a week. And the premise of these things, that, if you will, the drama that unfolds is remarkably similar. Somebody just goes in and shoots up some location. Sometimes it's completely random, like a movie theater. Sometimes it has kind of a weird political twinge to it, like with Planned Parenthood. The mass shooting in San Bernardino, we really don't know which one it is. It could be another classic American mass shooting of disgruntled employees. Who really knows? But again, at the end of it all, it doesn't matter. It is just happening so frequently now in the United States that it starts to blend into the background noise of our lives. And that is a terrifying statement about our country. The rest of the world must look at us and just be unable to understand what really is going on in the heads of apparently so many of our fellow Americans.
Right. Well, it's rare that you'd have multiple attackers in a workplace violence incident. But yeah, I mean, Josh, what does it say about us that faced with increasing mass shootings, the pace has actually increased since, attacks like Newtown and Aurora?
Well, I covered this, I don't know, 3 or 4 mass shootings ago for Latest. And if you look at, mass shootings and what, say, some gun control advocacy groups define as mass shootings, which is a shooting involving 4 or more people, they're not actually going up. Like the rest of crime in America, it's trending downward on sort of a larger term scale. But if you then, Mother Jones did a report where if you take away, domestic shootings, crime, like, gang-related things, and get down to just sort of these spectacle murder incidents, they are increasing in frequency, if not in number. Starting with Columbine, you had a couple years before the next one. And then there was Columbine, there was a couple shortly after, and then you have a span of years. And there was another one, I think it was Virginia Tech, and then you have a span of years. But now it was a span of months, and now it was a span of weeks. Now it seems to be a span of days before we get the next rampage shooting event. So is it a gun control issue? Is it a crime issue? Is it a media coverage issue? Is it because it's such a predictable spectacle that it's, driving people who have this urge for violence and attention to seek it this way, So I think there's a lot more. It's a much bigger question than just gun control, even though gun control is a huge issue.
I guess a part of it is how we also define mass shooting, whether you're talking about something like this, what you call a spectacular event, or, two or three more people being shot at once, which could be, crime or violence, whatever. Eric, how does the rest of the world look at us and see, like, we kill, 100 times as many people as that in the Paris attacks every year?
Well, it's tough because when we think of the United States, it's supposed to be this bastion of democracy, a place that's example for the rest of the world, but yet their population every almost week now, right? And it's tragic. I guess one of the major questions we need to ask when we look at the gun violence in the United States is this the normal going forward? Is this the cost of the Second Amendment? Is this something we have to get used to if we want to maintain the Constitution in current form, unless we're willing to take away gun rights, which then would upset a large portion of the population? Really, are we willing to accept gun deaths every year? And they probably will go up over time as people, I guess, become increasingly more violent or weapons get more deadly, because gun control in its current form hasn't worked. And I know in the past we were talking about ways to solve it, buyback initiatives, but one thing about the Australian buyback that we remember was that it was forced, it wasn't voluntary. So are we willing to take that step into a government that is pushing its power on the people, or can we somehow find a solution to a voluntary? I don't think we can. It has to be by force. Try to tackle the issue.
All right, your microphone was cutting in and out there. If you could check it out, Josh. 20 people were shot today. When we see one terrorist attack, doesn't matter how many people die. We can't wait to do anything. I mean, 4 people died in Benghazi, and we're still just Congress continues to investigate and hear. What needs to happen for the people that represent us to do anything about this issue? I mean, we saw 20 kids die in a school shooting, and the whole country was outraged. Nothing happened.
Well, it boils down to sort of what we call the national conversation. I mean, I'm sure by now on Twitter there's already people relatively prominent in conservative media who've tweeted something in support of gun control. We don't even have a chance to even know what the crime is before the political debate about gun control even starts. The president mentioned gun control in his statement, which in context, that makes sense because as the president, you want to appear like you're doing something. And again, with most of these rampage killings, the proposed gun control measures of background checks and training and things like that would not have stopped any one of the shooters, from Chattanooga to the television news shooting to the one before. Oh my God, I can't even keep the shooting straight because there's so damn many. The Colorado Springs shooting before the Colorado Springs shooting. There was a shooting there just weeks ago that, didn't quite get the press that the current one has. So we don't have a chance to even process the enormity of what this is before we're mired in the political bullshit of it. And unless there are, as a Republican or a group of Republicans who are willing to stand up and the media pissed at them to try to do something, it won't happen. Now, whether or not anything can be done, I think, is a different and not as easy question.
Peter, what do you say to people who say that most of these attacks probably would have happened if we did have stronger gun control laws?
Well, I think the interesting comparison here is to the way America reacts to terrorism. If you take some of those arguments that Josh was running through for us, which are the standard things people say, well, gun control in whatever form wouldn't have stopped any of the recent mass shootings, things like that. I mean, apply it to the way America deals with terrorism, and those arguments start to look very weak. And or the terrorist arguments look very weak. For example, one of the things we are constantly told by the government is that, well, we have our safety measures and our security measures, and shoes come off at the airport and what have you. And in fact, those are stopping terrorist attacks. You just don't know about it. Or you can't actually compile a list of attacks that didn't happen because those security measures were in place. And so if you take that and say, fine, let's have X, Y, or Z forms of gun control, and then spin it around and say, well, we can't even begin to tell you how many bad gun attacks we've stopped because of these things. We don't know how many mass shooters stepped back from the brink because of it. The thing would be that these arguments are politicized, but they're politicized at great danger to us here in the United States. No serious terror attacks seem to happen, but yet there's a multi-trillion-dollar government contractor industry that's grown up around them. We have seen the government step all over the First Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, the Fifth Amendment, and other laws and freedoms we have here, all in the name of protecting us against something that doesn't really seem to happen or happen all that often. Meanwhile, we ignore the fact that some 10,000 Americans a year die through gun deaths. You can categorize those 10,000, break it into as many categories as you like, but there's something very dangerous happening out there, in addition to the mass shootings, that politically we choose to, I'm going to get mixed up in terms here, we choose to politicize it in a very different way. We politicize it into some weird left-right, Second Amendment, government can take my guns when they pry them from my cold dead hands. Whereas with terrorism, we politicize it into an atmosphere of near constant fear and anxiety. I would suggest that if the national government and the media would put a fraction of the effort that they put into making us afraid of terrorists, into making us afraid of gun violence, then that national conversation might, in fact, start to shift into something potentially more productive.
Well, Peter reminded me. I was just going to say, Peter just reminded me of, when I sort of laid some of the blame at conservative media's feet, and I don't think maybe that was as fair as, especially since I didn't mention, as Peter did with the cold dead hands thing, the NRA. I mean, the NRA, like, there could be pilot gun control programs in states. There's these smart guns that can only be fired by people who, by the people who bought the gun. But the NRA fights everything with, the zealotry of anti-abortion protesters or other particularly zealous groups. I
get why they fight, right? Because if legislation gets passed, then firing effective. I'm not supporting the NRA. I get why they fight it.
But they win, and that's sort of the thing. Why do they win?
Right.
Well,
my question is, though, is American society so dangerous that we need this many people, that we need them to protect ourselves from errant thugs or criminals that exist? I mean, I live in Canada. I don't go outside thinking I'm going to get shot every day. I don't feel the need to carry a gun to protect myself. I've left my door unlocked many times and come home and nothing's gone. You know what I mean? Like, it's odd that there's such a paralyzing fear in the United States that everybody's out to kill you.
Just to break down what Eric said just by statistics, I mean, because I was writing an article just today about how you set a new record from those gun sales in one day, 180,000 guns sold on Black Friday. But, every day is a good day for guns in America. We sell more than 50,000 guns a day. More than half of the guns in the entire world are in the U.S., and we have 4.4% of the world's population. Go ahead, Peter.
Going back to the NRA, first of all, I did a story this week on Latest.com that the NRA successfully has opposed federal attempts to put people who are on the FBI's suspected terrorist list, some of the people on the no-fly list, for example, to prohibit them from buying guns legally. And the NRA defeated that. So you can be on a no-fly list, you can be on the FBI's terrorist lists, and you can go out and purchase a gun legally. That illustrates the absurdity of what the NRA is doing. Second, if there was somehow a lobbying group for terrorists that was as powerful and as well-funded as the NRA, then I suspect you'd see very different laws about terrorism in the United States, just kind of as a thought example. But picking up on something Eric has said, and perhaps others can jump in here too. I'm almost 56 years old. And I live in New York City. I have lived in a number of other urban areas in the United States, Cleveland, which has a very high crime rate. And, in my entire lifespan, the only serious criminal act that's happened to me or any of my family is we had a break-in when we were away from home, and that was like 30 years ago. There's never been a situation in my life where I've had to defend myself using potentially deadly violence. I mean, it just simply hasn't happened. Maybe I've lived a charmed life or whatever, but it hasn't. I haven't been hanging out in small town nowhere where everyone knows each other. I think it's a climate of fear and paranoia that just infects people in the United States. They have this image that they're going to, at any moment, they're going to be, have a shootout that is simply inaccurate, not borne out by reality, but yet fuels the number of guns that enter our society. And in some ways, all that does contribute to the terrible things, the incredible legacy of 10,000 people a year killed by firearms in our country.
Well, and don't forget, too, every time one of these shootings happens, the number one Republican argument is if they had guns, they could have defended themselves.
Right.
So when you have that argument, you have voters or people that are influenced by that kind of thinking. And I guess it makes sense why these people turn out to stores, buy guns.
Well, I've been lucky not to have been in a mass shooting myself, so I mean, maybe I'm just biding my time. But
you've been in a war zone.
I've been in an actual war zone, and I didn't get, I actually didn't carry a weapon there, and I managed to do okay. The thing is that I think a lot of it has to do with these myths. I mean, first of all, that you're going to stand up and shoot your way out of these situations. I did an article on Latest.com this week. Off-duty police officers, through their national organization, want to be able to bring their firearms to NFL games, so that if ISIS, tries to save the Giants from a fourth quarter loss by shooting up the stadium, these guys are going to pop up like cheerleaders, or, among 80,000 fans and start blasting away. At the minimum, think about in a mass shooting situation. First of all, as handguns are only useful out to a fairly short distance. If the shooters have vests, bulletproof vests on or whatever, I mean, that's going to reduce the effectiveness of handguns. You have to sort of know what you're doing. You have to have practice with your weapon and all those other things. But I mean, just imagine more people out of uniform with guns in these situations. I mean, it seems to me the most likely thing that's going to happen is the cops are just going to shoot them too at some point.
Yeah, because they're going to get confused, of course, right, with other people pulling out guns and shooting. It's just going to create it. I fully agree.
Josh, did you want to jump in?
Well, I mean, I was also in a war zone, and I did carry a weapon that I never used. So, but I mean, as heavy as it was, I was always kind of glad to have it. Now, like Peter said, in the Army, it's training. Like there's no way to know if anything had ever happened, and I was called upon to draw on that combat arms training, if I would have been, Tom Hanks or that weepy weasel guy from Saving Private Ryan. There's no way to know until you're in the moment. But I do know that, if I did engage, I'm sure I would have called on my training, So I think if you have training and you're armed, I mean, it's certainly better than not having training and being armed. So, when it's off-duty cops trying to, to carry off-duty, I mean, the cop thing, I did a piece this week about how, police are trained awfully. If it's in Florida, you have to pay for your own training, so you're getting to be great. So would I feel good with Florida cops carrying in an NFL stadium? Probably not. But if it was a police force where they're, trained with their weapons and also trained to know when not to use them, maybe I would feel safer. It's because that's the thing about guns, is even though we know that in a real shootout we would not be the hero, you still feel safer sometimes thinking of cops showing up with guns. So I don't know, it's a very sort of heavy presence in the American culture and the American psyche, sort of like Eric was saying, you know. I don't own a gun. I don't want to own a gun. But at the same time, I do feel comforted that if I ever did, I could. So I sort of get the other side of it. Now, if you're talking about gun owners, the exact same gun control reforms as President Obama. It's the NRA and the people who, you know, the media that's beholden to them and the politicians that are beholden to them that don't want any kind of gun control.
Well, you know, we were talking about terrorism. And one of the big debates over Planned Parenthood shooter is this domestic terrorism. And I really don't see the difference between a religious fanatic seeing a propaganda video online and shooting up an abortion clinic, or, you know, what happened in France. Peter, what's the difference between that terror and this terror outside of this was a white guy?
Well, you just hit the thing there. I mean, it was a white guy. I think the idea that people who vote can't be terrorists and people who don't vote can be terrorists has a lot to do with this. We can see that in the fact that none of the Republican candidates came out immediately after the shooting condemning it. I mean, Hillary and Bernie Sanders were immediately in the media condemning what happened there. I don't know if any of the Republican candidates actually got around to saying something wimpy at a later date, but their silence initially was noted. Angry white people form a core block of voters for them, people who hate Planned Parenthood and who may not commit violence themselves, but certainly don't weep knowing it was committed. Again, do the thought experiment. If there was a huge voting bloc in the United States of terrorists, I suspect you would find that many politicians would have far less negative things to say about terrorists. They might just keep their mouths shut when these things happen. The other side of this, in addition to that fairly cynical look at politics, is also and I'm glad Josh is not armed at this point in time because he might take a shot at me for that. But I mean, you know, the other thing is the dual message our government likes to send to us about terrorism. You know, on one hand, we are constantly whipped into a fear frenzy. ISIS is hiding out at the ANP. They're behind, you know, they're under the bed, whatever. But on the other hand, look, the government's keeping you safe. Nothing has happened. There hasn't been a 9/11 for over 14 years. So that duality that the government uses to manipulate people is a very powerful tool. If, in fact, there were terrorist incidents happening in the United States, whether they're done by angry white people or angry radical Muslim people, that would take away one portion of the whole messaging that the government likes to put out, that they're keeping us safe. And it justifies all the draconian measures. So I suspect that also comes into play about why government figures and their running dogs in the media are just not very quick to slap the label terrorism on anything that is outside of the narrative, if you will.
Well, I mean, just on...
Go
ahead, Josh.
I was just going to say that I kind of want to disagree with that, at least about abortion, because now I did a completely unscientific bit of research amongst my friends on social media. But so-called pro-life person who thinks that shooting up the Planned Parenthood clinic was a worse crime, a worse moral crime than abortion itself. So, you know, these politicians who, I mean, certainly some are cynically supporting pro-life causes because they want the votes. But others, and I think, you know, one that I can think of immediately is Rick Santorum. I mean, whatever he is a true believer in his beliefs. So I think for them it's really an issue that, you know, people who are not anti-abortion see it as an issue about whether or not a woman has a right to have the only person weighing in on a medical procedure. The other side, the pro-life side, they're trying to stop baby murder. I mean, so that Ted Cruz said it, or not Ted Cruz, Eric Erickson, a conservative blogger, said today, Planned Parenthood should be thankful that it doesn't happen more often. And in a way, I see his point, not that they should be thankful, but that, you know, if you think there's a group out there that is legally murdering children, who among us wouldn't try to do something to stop it? You know, and so for them, I think it's the rhetoric of it, you know, saying abortion is murder, calling people abortionists, and just, I think it's a very real feeling. It's not misplaced. It's actual, they want to save these baby angels from their whore mothers. And I think that is what inspires them to do violence, whether it's arson, trying to kill abortion doctors, or this guy in Colorado Springs. So I think that as far as issues go, this is as real as it gets. Like, there's never going to be compromise on this.
Yeah, that's actually what I wanted to go into next was, you know, what is the difference between someone like Rick Santorum, Carly Fiorina, Mike Huckabee, or even, I mean, they're candidates, whatever. They're like, the real bad stuff is on, like, conservative talk radio. It's on the internet. Eric, what's the difference between rhetoric like that and rhetoric you see in ISIS propaganda videos or radicalized imams?
I don't think there's anything different, because the one towards the abortion topic is accepted because seen as a social issue. We're talking about the idea of baby murder. Whereas when we look at the Middle East and ISIS, we see the Middle Eastern man. That's something that's a lot easier for us to get angry and going into the cause against. Whereas an issue like abortion splits our society. So, rest on that. But before I wanted to interject in the previous conversation, but unfortunately the other two guys took the spotlight a little long. But you were asking if we thought it was domestic terrorism. So, you know, I know what the definition of terrorism, but I punched it in on Google, and word for word, the use of violence and intimidation in the pursuit of political aims. And in the case of Robert Louis Deere, violence, killing people, intimidation, guns, political aims, abortion, right.
Well, that's the other thing is before a lot of the mass shootings we saw were mentally ill, you know, young kids. We're seeing a rise in politically motivated shooting. You know, Dylan Roof wrote a lot about, you know, black people raping white women and apartheid. And, you know, these aren't things a young kid just comes up with on his own.
Don't forget the guy in, I can't remember where it was. Was it Tennessee? The guy who shot up the theater or attacked the theater because of the Amy Schumer movie.
Louisiana.
Because he didn't think it was. In Louisiana, yeah. He was politically motivated as well. I forget, again, whatever madness it was, but I don't think he liked ladies dirty talking on the moving picture screen.
Yeah, I mean, just a week before the Planned Parenthood shooting, we saw three guys roll up to a Black Lives Matter protest in Minneapolis and shoot 5 people. I mean, thankfully no one died, and that's why that probably didn't get as much coverage as it should have. But, you know, what is I mean, why aren't we doing anything about these groups like Stormfront or these hardline, you know, crazy, radicalized media that these people seem to be acting on? Eric?
It's not a popular topic, unfortunately. When we're looking, like I was saying before, when we're looking between ISIS or domestic terrorism, international terrorism always takes the cake because people still remember 9/11, and that scares people. Domestic terrorism is less scary because, as odd as it sounds, Robert Louis Deere is a lot more common looking compared to an ISIS fighter with I forget what it's called on his head, and, you know, all the battle AK-47. That's a lot more scary looking to us on the television than a crazy picture of Robert Louis.
Peter, how can we stop the radicalization of young Christian men?
I think, you know, the ideas are not all that different. You've got, then you talk about with Islamic radicalization or any kind of radicalization. I mean, you have to understand what causes people to become so dispossessed of society that they're willing to act in such a violent way and almost in a random sense of violence. Part of that is, in fact, messaging. We have to step away from the idea that there's no harm being done by a lot of the right-wing propagandists who are sort of saying, yeah, violence is bad, wink, wink, and basically quietly endorsing the fact that that these killers exist on a spectrum. You know, there's people over here who will quietly donate a small amount of money to a so-called pro-life group, and then over here, there's guys who will take an AK out and shoot up a Planned Parenthood. We need to simply stop accepting that that is, again, part of our society, and that the messaging that those people are receiving, oftentimes with a wink and a nudge from very highest levels of government, really is detrimental to our nation. That said, scary foreigners win every time over scary neighbors. You can't go wrong in the United States trying to whip up fear and frenzy over some kind of scary foreigner. I actually did a piece quite a while ago on Latest where I compared some World War II anti-Japanese propaganda to some current anti-ISIS propaganda. And you really, in many senses, just changed some of the words around. And even then, you didn't have to do very much of that. The words fanatic, barbaric came up. The Japanese beheaded a small number of American prisoners, and that was featured very heavily in all the anti-Japanese propaganda. The messaging has not changed. They just kind of switched the characters in and out, but scary foreigners are always good for that, particularly when you're running for something.
Yeah, Josh, forget gun control, mentally ill people, all that for a second. How do we cut down on the amount of politically motivated shootings? I mean, we created hate crime laws, but like the critics of gun control laws say, a gun law is not going to stop someone from breaking the murder law. Hate crime laws aren't going to stop people from killing people in the name of their political or religious beliefs.
I mean, that's a question that I think if we could answer, you know, we would be the first in all of human history. I do think that we do, while still respecting the principles of the ideals of the First Amendment, free expression, you know, shutting down Stormfront because it's a place where angry white people like to go and type the N-word over and over again. You know, that's sort of against the idea or the ideal of free expression. That you know, it's not, you don't win by taking away all these other arguments. You win by making the better argument. And that's what I think we're not doing. I think that's what a lot of people are not doing. The greatest tragedy after 9/11 was not that. The greatest tragedy after 9/11 is that the outpouring of support that the U.S. saw in the wake of it for that month or 6 weeks was sort of also unprecedented in human history. Like it affected more than just Americans seeing these two giant symbols of America crumble to the ground and then people rushing into the smoke to try to save people like that. There was a moment there where we could have really done something. But instead, what happened is we went on and did exactly what Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda and now the so-called Islamic State, we did what they wanted us to do. We went to war, ginned up some of the population into being more receptive to racism. You know, one of the stories I'm publishing today is Ben Carson was accidentally right when he said that the Syrian refugees coming in would be radicalized because of U.S. racism. And that's completely possible, you know?
Yeah, there was another politician who said that we can't let them into Texas because guns are too easy to get.
Oh, God. I can't even tell what fucking caricature is anymore, Igor. I don't know.
But, talking about places like Stormfront and those others, again, looking at what the United States has been doing in regards to terrorism, and let's be generous here and leave the First Amendment questions, which are significant, aside. But if any of us were to set up a pro-ISIS website, it wouldn't last very long, and there's a real good chance that we'd end up in jail for, aiding the enemy, if you will. I think we did a story recently about a kid blogger in Virginia who was reposting some ISIS material, alleged ISIS material, and he was arrested simply for retweeting things like that concerning ISIS. We have this wonderful catch-all category called conspiracy to commit terrorism, which is used to arrest people all the time. And essentially, conspiracy to commit terrorism seems to boil down to sort of thinking about it at almost any level. I think I'm going to build a dirty bomb in my apartment. I don't have any nuclear material, and I have no idea how to do any of that, but I'm thinking about it, and therefore subject to arrest for conspiracy. I think some of those same laws could be applied to our angry white male terrorists, for example, and some of those same laws could be applied to messaging that is designed specifically to incite violence, racial violence, or violence against the police. Go ahead and put up a website claiming that the police are murderers, that they kill babies, and we need to strike them down wherever they stand in Jesus' name. Go create that website and see how long things go smoothly. It's only we draw these lines in odd places, and then we wonder why things like the Planned Parenthood shooting take place.
Well, I guess that on the Stormfront thing, I wasn't saying we should shut down Stormfront. I'm not even saying that that it's created to incite racial violence.
It wouldn't be the worst thing that happened, but shit.
There's plenty of peaceful racists, but there are people who are looking to commit violence on there. Since we on ISIS, this week Defense Secretary Ash Carter announced that we're going to send another 100 to 150 special ops forces to Syria, and he called it a targeting force. And it's a cute little game they've been playing since last year. Last June, Obama announced that we're sending 300 military advisors to Iraq. 2 weeks later, he sent a letter to Congress saying we're going to send another 200. In August, Chuck Hagel announced we're sending 130 more. In September, Josh Earnest announced we're sending 350 more. A week after that, Obama announced 475 more. A month after that, 1,500 more. Just this past June, another 450. In October, Obama finally said we're going to send 50 special ops forces to Syria. And now Ash Carter says about 100 to 150 more. I'm not good at math. That's like well over 3,000 special advisors in Iraq and Syria. I mean,
there's 330. There's 3,300 troops in Iraq right now, and this expeditionary force will probably be less than 1,000, because you're going to have the war fighters, the trainers, then you're going to need the support staff, the support units. So, it'll probably be less than 1,000. We'll probably be then near around 5K troops in Iraq.
Well, I mean, we're talking about special ops.
Thank God we won the war.
Yeah, exactly. How does you were in the military? How does an advisor differ from a combat soldier when the bullets start flying?
Absolutely doesn't. I mean, there's no. First of all, the first thing they tell you in the military. Now, again, I went in the unit that I was in. I was a military postal soldier, meaning that I was USPS for the Army. But when I got to training, they said there's no such thing as a non-combat soldier, and that turned out to be true in Iraq. I mean, in the first years of the war, truck drivers were the most targeted soldiers, and they're not considered combat either. So if you're in a hostile area, if you're getting hazard pay, if you're armed, if you have your gear and you have your weapon, you are in combat. To people or just avoiding it, it's combat. And so with that comes all the attendant stresses and issues and things like that, which, again, we are not talking about. Hasn't been mentioned in one debate outside of just trying to use veterans as props. And, with this escalation of fighting in Iraq, And remember, he said this was going to be a standing force, so that also means likely multiple rotations, essentially permanent. So there's going to probably be between 5. What do you think, Peter? When it finishes out, they'll probably stop at 10, like 10K?
Maybe. But again, keep in mind how slippery these numbers are, even if we accept that when they tell us there's 5,000, there really are only 5,000. First, you're going to have to throw in a couple of layers of CIA and paramilitary. You're going to throw in a lot of contractors who have taken over some of the logistics work that in the past would have been done by soldiers.
The Postal Service, contractors now. I wouldn't have an Army job.
And you're also going to include a very large number of military people who are physically located outside of Iraq and Syria's borders, who are very much in the fight. Pilots are a perfect example, but also all sorts of rescue teams and other operators and quick reaction forces and stuff that may, park with their noses right on the Jordanian-Syrian border, but very much are part of this all. We have managed to witness a very slow motion but very deliberate escalation of this war over the last 16 months without really a word being raised by any side of the political spectrum, absent a few angry white bloggers, mostly right here, and Rand Paul, whose presidential ambitions are such that he'll be probably applying for work at Latest.com at some point, hoping to double his income.
I still get to be senior political correspondent.
No, and we still get to make fun of him. In fact, it'd be fun to have him on the shows here and say, what a stupid name you have. You have a last name that's a first name and a first name that isn't anything. But that's not the point. The point is that this escalation has occurred without anyone really raising a question. No one has started to ask any serious questions about exactly what the point is anymore. And we also are ignoring the fact that the Iraqis, at least publicly, are saying they don't want that expeditionary force there. The Badr Brigade, which is one of the Shia groups that was most aggressive towards American forces during our occupation period, has announced that they're prepared to go back and start fighting Americans again, that they see this increase as a stealth reoccupation of their country, that the Americans are not going to be leaving, that we are going to be having permanent forces inside their country. And
that's why they picked Erbil. That's why they picked up in the Kurdish areas of Erbil, because the Peshmerga is fine with us being there. But
but at the same time, the U.S. wants to maintain the fiction, of course, that Kurdistan is part of Iraq. At the same time, they take advantage of the fact that it's not. Those kind of dual messages eventually catch up and bite you in the ass. And even if they're based out of Erbil, I don't think anybody is content to think that they're simply going to operate within Kurdish-controlled territories. So, if you're talking about potentially the United States coming into conflict with Shia militias and Sunni militias and or ISIS, you're very close to replicating the conditions where we got our ass kicked right up until 2011. Again, I'm not sure what the point is anymore.
Well, you mentioned that pretty much just Rand Paul right now has been the loudest on this issue. I mean, everybody is silent, especially on the Democratic Party, who would have just completely derailed Bush on this. And, there's no way that Obama could have been allowed to send 3,300 troops immediately if it wasn't done the way it's been done. Why are members of Congress basically allowing Obama to pull Bush-style politics and not calling him on it? Because right now we'd be calling for Bush's head if it was him. Peter?
Well, I think it's the Hillary example. Hillary has not been able to live down her vote in 2003 in favor of the Iraq War. Congress had a chance to vote for or against the Syrian air campaign. I guess it was about 2 years ago, and wouldn't. I think they don't want to weigh in. They want to let Obama do what he's doing so that they don't have to either approve it and have it bite them in the ass a few years later if it doesn't work out, like Clinton, or they don't want to oppose it because if it seems to be supported by the American people and it seems to, quote, work out, they don't want to be seen as opposing it. So let Obama do it. He'll take the blame, or they'll help. They'll certainly take some of the credit if things go smoothly, which they won't. And Obama is untouchable anyway. He's got less than a year in the office. He's going nowhere. He can absorb any failure here that happens, and the Democrats don't have to touch it. It's a sad state of affairs when Congress is so willing to aggressively ignore its constitutional mandate in the system. And the White House now under two presidents is happy to just stomp through the hole that Congress is leaving open for them.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing how Congress is just completely willing to abdicate their constitutional powers, yet, pretty much go out there and talk about how they're going to shut down the government over Planned Parenthood funding. But all right, I just want to touch on one more thing.
And don't forget before we switch gears, don't forget that Obama's still getting pressure from the right to be more warlike. I mean, if we're looking at it as like what the left says and what the right says, the left is still the party of peace, as it were, because if it were up to Lindsey Graham, we'd have 50,000 troops in Syria right now. So it seems like, I remember that Bernie Sanders had a pretty standard pivot. Anytime he was ever asked about give it deference and then pivot to climate change being a national security issue and talk about that. Because he's against war, but appears weak because of that, and so he avoids talking about it. So when he said that in a debate, he ended up being mocked for a week, saying, comparing terrorism and national security to climate change. It seems like there's only certain rhetoric will accept. Americans, or maybe just the press that has the access, will accept from these people on the issue of war, and that's, we're going to kill him, and just how much we don't know.
I just wanted to touch on what was the big story of the day before the shooting in California. Yesterday, Chicago Mayor Rahm Emanuel fired the chief of police amid the protests about the Laquan McDonald shooting. And the media today is focused on whether Rahm Emanuel took an active part in covering it up. And they're treating it as a debate, and it's not. It happened last fall. The police commissioner saw the video days after and admitted yesterday or the day before that he saw it, and it didn't match the account that the police gave initially. The state attorney saw it shortly after that, did not move to indict the officer who had been employed by the police department right up until last week. And even though all these people had seen it. And why? Well, this wasn't long after Ferguson and Rahm Emanuel happened to be in a close re-election battle, and just 5 days after he did win re-election, they gave the family $5 million, even though they had never sued them. And part of the settlement was that the family couldn't release the video because they had apparently obtained some video of the shooting. So these are facts. This was a politically motivated cover-up, not even counting the police allegedly deleting the video that was from the surveillance tape in the local Burger King. So today, Emanuel finally announced that he won't resign. Peter, how does he survive this when he's straight in the center of this massive controversy?
By doing it. The people of Chicago, well, it's the whole big lie thing. If you're gonna lie big. And in fact, Emanuel said, fine, here's the size of the balls I'm bringing to the table. If you got bigger ones, come after me. He throws the police chief under the bus, which is enough for a good chunk of Chicago to say, well, I guess he did something about this. And he challenges them. You got a problem with this? Have a recall election.
I think you're partially right, but I think yesterday after the police chief was fired, I think we actually saw protests flare up even more because I think they smell blood. Yeah, maybe. Rahm is extremely well connected. He was a high-ranking official in the Obama White House. He and Hillary aren't necessarily good friends,
but they share political ambitions and similar, and and a need to kind of watch each other's backs. And I think Rahm's feeling is, hey, I'll just ride this out. Protests don't last forever. The Chicago winter's coming. And Americans are reliably distracted by, the next shiny object that
What is that?
media.
What is that, Peter? What is that?
I agree, Peter. Within 2 or 3 weeks, nobody will even remember this happened. That's
I don't know. I mean, when you look at Ferguson and the outcry there, I mean, first, you got
maybe longer, but
yeah, but you did get the cop, and I mean, he wasn't indicted for because of the prosecutor, but it was taken to a grand jury. The police chief stepped down ultimately. They do last a while. The pressure definitely lasts a while. The protests don't stay in the streets.
There's many of the shootings I disagree with, but I think the Ferguson one, especially in Michael Brown's case, that one's a little more gray in terms of the officer maybe not being as in the wrong. There are other shootings like Tamir Rice. That one's disgusting. One that we're obviously talking about right now. All disgusting. Michael Brown, I'm a little more on the fence because I do think he wasn't a moral character. He wasn't passionate goodness. But I think in that case, that one. So Ferguson, I think that's really where the Black Lives Matter movement was born. It may have existed before, but that's really where it came to the forefront. I think that's why that went, because they were just kind of getting their baby going and taking the first steps. Now they're going, but most of America is pretty tired of Black Lives Matter. They're fed up. They think of them as thugs for whatever reason because of some of the bad press they've gotten. And so, like the Tamir Rice shooting, for example, that one didn't really have that much coverage. A couple of weeks, it disappeared. Back now because the case is going on.
The grand jury, yeah, he's probably not going to get indicted.
Yeah. Right, and it's awful. I think it should be in that case. But same with Laquan McDonald. The footage is disgusting, but 4 weeks to a couple months later, and people will just forget. Probably because there'll be another one, which is sad to say, but that's what will happen.
You saw a lot of people defend Darren Wilson after the Michael Brown shooting, and even with the Tamir Rice shooting, the officer saw a kid with a gun, and he did the first thing he thought to do, whatever. I haven't seen that many people defend Jason Van Dyke, the officer that shot Laquan McDonald. The video pretty much speaks for itself. Josh, do you think that will have any bearing in whether or not the state's attorney and the mayor stay on in Chicago?
I mean, the thing about it is the Laquan McDonald shooting. You're right. I mean, pretty much everyone agrees that video is disgusting and that this guy just straight up murdered this kid. And I think that will get way more play than perhaps the fact that the cop is on trial. Like, they're going to try to keep the focus on Van Dyke. I mean, remember, we're also talking about Chicago politics here. As far as like corrupt and shitty things that Chicago politicians have done, I mean, what Emanuel did is practically quaint. In fact, I could even see people arguing, if we accept the fact that Chicago is just a cesspool of corruption, that by charging the officer after the fact anyway, he's doing the right thing because he. Like, I think that a figure like Emanuel in a place like Chicago, if he chooses to ride the storm out, he will be able to do it. And I think as long as justice is done to Van Dyke in terms of the community and the protesters, they will let him get away with it.
Well, look at how many cops get off, though, because they were seemingly overcharged. Even George Zimmerman, you probably could have gotten him on manslaughter, and they weren't able to prove murder. Do you think that, this was a first-degree murder charge. Do you think that they could convict an officer of first-degree murder? Why?
The only
he didn't arrive there premeditatingly believing that he's going to kill this guy, although we saw him shoot a guy like this on the ground.
Him chasing the guy. But there's footage of him chasing him prior, and the first account was that Laquan came at him aggressively. Well, no, in the footage you see that he's going after him, and then he just kind of opens fire and doesn't stop. The only way that he'll be able to snake out of this is if he can prove the whole "I was under threat" argument. Rely on. And in this case, there was no threat. Maybe Laquan had a knife, right? That's That's what was going on. So
Yeah.
he was walking up the street pissed off on drugs with a knife, but at no point does he like viciously lunge at the officer. At no point should they have felt threatened. There was no immediate danger. I mean, unless you think that he can like throw the knife Matrix style and kill the officers. But let's be real here.
Matrix style. It's not funny, but that was funny.
But that's not that's not going to happen. It's not like the kid had a gun and he was like contemplating shooting somebody. He had a knife. He was a good 10 or 15 feet away. There was no threat of violence unless the officer walked up to him and said, "Stab me."
I don't know, Josh. What do you think? The first degree murder is a high bar of proof to meet. Do you think
it's a very hard conviction to get? I don't know. I'm sort of with you, and I'm not as certain as Eric. I feel like that. Especially when it comes to police officers claiming I felt my life was threatened or the lives of other officers, because that's the way I think if I was his attorney.
Where they really can't claim that. The video is pretty definitive, but that still wouldn't. That still wouldn't account for the.
But remember, the video shows it, but it's what they hear in the courtroom. Again, the right attorney, anything's possible, because just the statistics alone, cops get the benefit of the doubt.
But I wonder, because
I don't know if first degree murder.
Is this, sorry, not to cut you off, but is this the chance for the government to come through and set a precedent for this? With all the police shootings we've seen, with all the white officer, black criminal violence, is this a chance where it could change? I mean, I want to believe it.
Well, you know what? As we said before, it's Chicago, so I mean, they might get it. They might be able to do it, and it'll have nothing to do with the law. Like, you're right. If the first degree murder charge sticks, that will be an interesting shift, I think, in the way things go. So, I think. To the question about Rahm Emanuel, it all depends on what happens with the trial. To the question about the trial, there's no way to know.
Well, that could go on years. Peter, do you think they can get a conviction for first-degree murder in this case?
It's going to be very, very difficult. The key issue, as I think Eric pointed out, is that the jury has to be convinced it was premeditated. Before the officer got there and pulled out his gun, he had to be planning to do it. And the jury can easily be swayed, first of all, by the officer's statement. Second, you have to sort of proactively prove what he was thinking, and that's always very difficult. And the idea of heat of the moment is one of the things that separates first degree from other murder charges. And the officer can argue clearly that, hey, I was swept up in the heat of the moment. If he thinks he's going to go down for something, then he's going to go down for. Pardon?
16 shots, though?
Well, it's what happened before he pulled the trigger. That's where the difference is.
But I think firing into somebody 16 times also tells a story. If you're afraid for something, you shoot him a couple times. But firing another 13 after that?
Well, there was a case in Cleveland where a handful of cops shot up a couple's car and killed them well over 100 times. I don't remember the exact number, including one guy who jumped up on the hood of the car and just started opening fire, and they all got off. Officer Michael Brella.
Yep. So we'll see. We'll see. There's also the possibility, the officer could plead down to something. This trial will go on for a very, very long time, and it's in Rahm and everyone else's political interest that it does.
Gotta love the police system.
Yeah, a year from now, people are going to pay even less attention to these things.
All right. Well, this was another depressing edition of the Latest.com show. Every week I say maybe next week we'll talk about something fun, and this time, probably not. Probably the same stuff next week. So thanks for joining us. Thank you guys for joining me, and keep reading Latest.com.